This is the Farm Voices podcast, sharing information about regenerative agriculture, climate resilience, and agricultural policy in the United States. I'm speaking with Scott and Christie Heartquist of Heartquist Hollow Family Farm in Arizona. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Hi, how are you?
Can you share a bit of the story of how your farm got started and how long you've been farming?
Our farm got started in 2015. We bought a small piece of property in Arizona. We have three daughters, and I grew up farming in agriculture, and Christy grew up in an agriculture community. And the values that we both appreciate from our upbringing come around animals and agriculture. So our original intention was to do a small homestead and teach our kids where their food comes from, how it's raised, and how to deal with animals and the work ethic that comes for it. Hearing from people that your food comes from the grocery store, they actually have no understanding of where it actually originates, is a hard one for us and has been. So that's in 2015 we started a little homestead. In 2017, Christy was having recovering from some medical issues, and we were talking, and she kept talking about sheep and exploring this idea of animals, and she was teaching school. So even with all the challenges she was facing medically, she was really happy about this part of it. Not moving around and not being able to do her daily things is a challenge for her. To see her happy and not out physically working was great to see. And it started that conversation of why are we teaching school? Why am I working in corporate America? If this is really what it makes us happy, can we do more? And so in early 2018, Christy decided she was going to stop teaching and take on the farm. And it's kind of how it started. And then September of 2018, I shut down the business. And then we had the choice of, do I want to go work for someone, or do both of us want to work on the farm? And I think that was, we obviously made the decision to do the farm.
Here we are.
I mean, there's a lot that goes into where we are in 24 versus 2018, but it's kind of why do we do it? We did it because both of us found more pleasure in working with animals and agriculture and growing things than going into a corporate job or teaching school in those aspects.
And what type of animals and crops do you raise?
Right now we have chickens for layers. We raise a breed of pig called Mangalitas. We raise Katahdin sheep. And then we have a small amount of cows that are Angus-cross.
Goats.
And we do have some meat goats. We have our daughter one of our kids has a small herd of meat goats. So she sells them to us to process and sell. It's a good setup for her.
Truly a family business, right?
Exactly.
And when thinking about the animals, in terms of their location on the farm and their range and incorporation into the various components of the farm, how does that work for you?
Our goal is to rotationally graze all of our livestock, and we're in the process of making that happen. We're our ranch where it sits is in a floodplain for part of it, and then the other part is above the floodplain. And so what we have to work with out of the floodplain right now is focusing on moving the sheep around to different pastures and letting them rest. We're in the process of building a couple different new pig areas for the pigs to be able to follow behind them, which is exciting. and have them be on pasture as well. So, I mean, that's our goal, is to be able to move sheep, to keep to move all of our animals, to keep our animals healthy, and in turn to be able to turn the soil, fill the soil full of nitrogen and carbon, and really build that soil health back, which is a challenge in Arizona. With the amount of desertification that's going on and wind erosion, it's a challenge to keep the soil covered.
So both your sheep and your pigs are pastured.
Yes.
That's great. How did you become aware of the value of pastured animals? And was that a principle that you held at the time of the founding of your farm?
It actually was, and I think it's always been important to us, but we didn't necessarily have a name for it at the time. But we knew, when we had a smaller piece of property, we knew we could only have a certain amount of animals on that. We didn't want it to look like a feedlot. We didn't want it to all of the greenery just turn into dirt. And so when before we started ranching, when we were more homestead focused and our livestock was growing, we searched out neighbors that weren't using their back pasture so we could continue to grow our herds and still be able to graze them, have them be on pasture, and for us just to have that standard of having help. I mean, when they're on pasture, they're so much healthier. They're not enclosed, they're not in the same space. So,
and what we learned during that process was one particular neighbor was really focused on how much better his lawn pasture looked as we moved the sheep across it. And yeah, it all came through, and he was planning for his daughter's wedding. Can you run your sheep through this area? And it needs to be 3 weeks before, because 3 weeks after you run the sheep, then the grass is this color. So it was very aesthetic for him. Had no value in what we're really doing with the soil. But for us, we're like, oh,
there's something to that.
There's a lot to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it literally removed all the noxious weeds that he was really upset about and replaced it with what was naturally going to grow out there. So yeah, moving them, we thought it was a great idea, but then when you get to see it in such a small microcosm, and how, because we're talking about 10 by 10 plots at this time. So they're not these huge, I guess it's 100 square foot plots, but it gives you a really good idea of like, oh, if this happens in this small area, what happens in the larger section. So trying to move that into what we're doing now, going from, like I said, 100 square foot plots to 110 acres. So how do we manage this?
Really interesting too that you wanted your children to have the experience of the food cycle and understand those aspects of life, but not only did you want them to have that, you wanted them to have a picture of how the animals are in a more natural life cycle as well. And that's a beautiful consistency between your family and your farm.
We had a lot of questions from people of like, well, do you name the animals? And do your kids eat them? And how do you deal with that? That seems really mean and cruel. And I would actually say it's the opposite, because what we learned is, and we have 3 daughters, and they're all very sensitive and have their own adjustment to things, but all of them are happy to know how the animals are raised, and that would be the conversations they would have. I don't know that they think about it anymore because they're now in their teenage years, but we would talk about what animal we were eating in that small version of where they were. By name.
Because they wanted to know which one it was by name.
And so
it didn't deter them from eating whatever was served from that animal. It was just very much curious and matter of fact. There was no emotion behind it, just very matter of fact.
So it is very interesting. Now there are animals that are off limits. There are animals that our children are like, this one's not going. And so we have a few pets.
Usually the bottle babies. Those are harder to send to process because that's a different kind of attachment.
So you recently acquired additional ranch property and a processing facility. Could you talk a little bit about that and why you had a need to expand?
Sure. In February of 2020, we had in our mindset, if I had enough sheep that we could start selling meat at the market. And so we're really excited. We bring, I don't know, I can't remember whether it was 8 or 10 sheep to processing facility, get it all inspected and processed and packaged. Kind of the proof of, does this work? Can we actually make a business or a living out of this? And these animals are going to make X amount of money, and so we should have enough animals for 6 months supply. And if in 6 months we sell through this, then we can make this viable, make it work. And so that was February 2020. We got them back mid-March of 2020, and COVID was in full swing, and we are deemed essential. And so our farmers markets were essential. And we sold through the 6 months of meat in 3 weeks. And so the upside was we had a large cash infusion. Downside was we had no more meat. We had animals that were waiting to go and to be processing more. We reached out to a bunch of other local farms and brought eggs to the market. We were able to consolidate that. So it took our business to a different level as far as working with other ranchers, other farmers, and what we needed. And so as we acquired more animals for processing, and our animals were growing out for processing, we're still reliant on another processor, which also with COVID, all of a sudden, here in Arizona, we had a lot of animals coming in from California because none of the processing facilities are open in California. And the regulations and whatever they were doing to manage their disease, the COVID crisis, was pushing people here. So we're having processing dates canceled, we're having them moved, we're having them changed, to the point that we had to book processing dates a year out.
So you had to book processing dates before your animal was even born. So you don't know how many animals, you don't know how many offspring you're going to have. You don't know the genders. We generally, if it's a female with great conformation, we would keep her to be a breeder. So there were all these what ifs that were really hard to, run a business and support a family on when we didn't have that tangible information to know how we were going to make it happen. So that was, so during COVID, that was when we realized that one of our big missing links was processing in our operation, and that to be able to be in control of processing would kind of be that next step of just integrating everything together.
Yeah, and we've learned now that that's pretty unique. We're one of very few ranches that have inspected processing. There's a few of us out there, but not a lot. And our big thing was not letting other vendors control what we have to bring to the market and how can we participate, because it's terrible. It's hard to do. And, they talk about how limited processing space is. It really is very limited, especially on the small scale or smaller scale. Most of the cattle in Arizona get shipped out of Arizona because they don't have the processing capacity to do them. Most ranchers don't raise them out to finished weights because why would they do it? They can make almost as much money selling them sooner, and they don't have a market. So for us, at the end of 2020, we started researching and found another ranch that was also family owned, that the children were not interested in moving forward with it much longer. And so we were able to come in and work with that family to purchase their ranch and the processing facility that went along with it, which also added beef to our offerings. We weren't going to do beef. We weren't doing beef at the time. So we had to learn a lot about grass-fed cattle. We understood sheep, pigs, chickens, but cattle were another thing. So June of 21, we purchased the ranch and processing facility, sort of kicked off where we are now. It took us to a completely different realm.
And you touched on this a little bit, but Could you speak again to the specific venues and methods that you're using to sell your farm products?
We are primarily direct to consumer, where we work multiple weekly farmers markets in the Phoenix and Tucson areas. So that's we do have some wholesale accounts, but most of our sales are farmers markets, direct to consumer, which is fantastic to have those relationships with customers. All of our children have grown up working the farmers market. Our 18-year-old runs her own booth, which is great. And then we have some really supportive team members at the processing facility, as well as at the farmers market, that also help us make it happen.
It grew us from being us, our family, the 5 of us, to I think we have 12 or between 12 and 15 employees. And so that was not in the original plan of we're going to employ a bunch of people, but our farm is in a really rural district. Our ranch has a processing facility. So we've struggled to get employees, but we have a great team now. It has offered us that ability to provide jobs and to bring them into the market.
That's great. Are you exporting any of your meat products?
No, right now we are just local. So we don't ship, and we don't sell outside of Arizona.
So you're really serving your local community, both in
Mhm.
terms of jobs and the food products.
Absolutely.
So I know one of the things that we are going to talk about, or planning on talking about, is the grants and those pieces, because at the same time we bought the property in June of 21. July of 21 is when the first meat packing grants came out. And so we received the grant in 21 and in 22, and there's still one that was supposed to be, they still haven't announced what's happening. It's supposed to be announced in September of 23. It still hasn't happened. But, those grants for us were pivotal for us to be able to continue what we're doing, and for us to be able to offer those jobs, for us to build out the plant.
When we bought the processing plant, they were grandfathered into certain clauses, and so when the change in ownership occurred, we couldn't operate the processing facility until we made certain upgrades and modifications, and that meant we had to close. We just purchased this amazing facility through a FSA loan, and then we couldn't operate it for a few weeks. Plus we had staff, and it was summer, and summer in Arizona, sales always go down because so many people leave Arizona because of the heat. And so it was this, it was a tricky season trying to make everything work. And so we were really fortunate that we received the grant, because I'm not sure how we would have made it happen without the grant.
So yeah, I mean, I know that was part of the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the stuff that they're working with now, as far as in the new farm bill. I would say that what that did for us as a business and as a ranch was we are working with the USDA, and so we should be federally inspected in September. When we purchased our processing facility, it was processing 1 or 2 cattle a week. Now we're processing 5 to 10, and including sheep and pigs. So we're operating way above capacity. We're just making everything work while we're expanding. But when you ask about export, I don't know that we'll export out of the U.S., but by going USDA, we'll be able to start shipping throughout the United States. Just today, it seems like every other day we get a call or an email from somebody who'd like us to ship the meat and to Illinois or wherever, and we can't right now. It's inspected to be sold within the state of Arizona, but not outside.
Well, and I also think that some of our farmers market customers would utilize that option, particularly in the summer when, you know, even if you go to the farmer's market at 7 a.m., it's still over 100 degrees. And so that would just be a wonderful service, a wonderful option to be able to provide our customers of, hey, during the summer, you know, we can have that shipped to you, and then we'd love to see you back at the market supporting everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it goes off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so once again, the holdup is
the newest grant was put together, and they changed it slightly from the first two releases. The details aren't really important. But they made some changes to it, and at the same time, they cut the staff, and then they got 3 times the amount of applications that they received on the prior 2 versions, and so they really haven't been able to. Well, they tell me they haven't been able to go through all the applications yet.
got it.
To get it. So if we haven't been declined,
Right, we've been told no news is good news.
and so
Meaning like they would have contacted us if we were no longer in the running for the
Right.
grant. So we're still hopeful.
But that grant, the difference in that grant allows us to purchase much larger processing, more efficient processing equipment.
Mhm.
Helps us do things in a more humane manner. We're very humane about how we treat our animals, but the regulations around, what's it called? Humane certifications.
Well, the animal welfare
Yeah.
certifications.
Mhm.
We would like to have that certification for our processing facility, and to do that, there's some very specific equipment that we need to buy that we will buy when we hear back from the
It's also very
but
expensive equipment.
very
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
not
I
something
understand.
that summer market sales in Arizona can support.
so I mean, the holdup, we're still going to get the USDA grant or the USDA inspection. It's, are we inspected on 20 animals, or are we going to be able to be inspected on 40?
Mhm.
So for
And-
us,
And we also use some of our inspected days, not just for our business, but there's also other local ranchers that we process those inspected days for because they can't get in to any other processing facility. And so, our philosophy is there is plenty of business to go around. There are so many people that want to be buying local meat, wanting to know how those animals are treated, that really want to take a turn away from the grocery store, and some of those misconceptions that happen there. And so we are excited to be able to expand because we can support other ranchers selling their own product instead of shipping it out of state. And that in turn helps our whole community. It helps them as the seller, it helps our communities, eating something local, something healthier, more accessible. So we're excited about it.
and the market's there. Like, we sell out most everything every week. So it is what's out there. But we definitely, like I said, the ranchers are sending their animals out. When they have the ability to process them, they do. And so we work with several ranchers. We work with them and do our best to help the ones we can. And sometimes we just don't have space. But they've been very helpful to us to develop where we are, and so we're in kind providing the same.
Mhm.
So it's a very welcoming community.
Mhm. Thanks for explaining that.
One of the things I'd like to address, because this is a constant struggle that we are facing, is I hear all this conversation about rural development. Oh, we want to support the rural community. We want to support the rural development. Fortunately, we're a female-owned company, a veteran-owned company, so we qualify for all these programs. But in order for us to continue this development process, we need to be able to provide housing so that we can build the educational programs so that we can continue to employ these people. Right now, we have people that drive an hour and a half to 2 hours a day to come to work at our place. And it's not because we don't have people around us.
One way. That's one.
That's one way.
Wow.
It's because the people that are around us, they don't have the resources to come and work for us and for us to teach them. And so it's really a challenge where if we can provide housing, we can provide that location, we can start to work more with a lot of these kids, because if you're in the community where you're 18 years old, you're getting out. You're going to go to Phoenix and you're going to get a construction job. You're going to go somewhere and you're going to go where you can make enough money to support yourself. Because in our area, unfortunately, you're a rancher, you're a miner, or you have chemical dependency issues. There's not a whole lot of people outside of those realms. There are a few, but you work at Speedway, or there's.
So we would love to be able to provide permanent housing. Right now, all of us, including ourselves, are in temporary. We're like fifth wheels and campers, and we would love to be able to bring in people that want to be there and their families and give them a real roof over their head, especially with the brutalness of summer. A camper is a hard place to live with air conditioning. It's not a permanent structure.
It's very tough.
And when you work outside in 110-degree weather all day, you need to be able to go inside and really just be able to feel that. So feel the air conditioning. So yeah, I think that if we had access and we were able to build permanent housing structures, that would be a game changer for us.
Yeah, and that's the part that we don't really see in the programs we're working with. Like, they talk about rural development, but it's the housing aspect that we struggle with. Is they can live in these torn up, really dilapidated mobile homes in the community. The average income in that community is, for the family, is like $18,000 a year, and so there's nothing. They don't have a lot of anything. But once again, that's the piece that we're not seeing on the ends of production. If we can continue to build out facilities and do that, but if we're going to employ 13 people, it'd be really amazing if we could employ them from that area. If when they're 18 years old, we can say, you know what, you don't have to go to Phoenix to make 18, 20 bucks an hour. You can come here and we'll teach you how to do this. And we'll have a career that if you do decide to go to Phoenix, then you can go make $30 an hour. So that's one of our goals we've talked about, is building that piece. It's really rural, because even to put in a slab of concrete where we are is twice as much as it is to do it in the metro areas.
Mm-hmm. And where in Arizona are you located?
We are located kind of halfway between Phoenix and Tucson, but off the beaten path, not on the main freeway. So a couple mountain ranges over. So for being in between, we're about an hour and a half away from Phoenix and about an hour and a half away from Tucson, which works out really well, because that's kind of a north, one way is north, one way is south, and you can get to either metropolis area to be able to do a market or sell products or restock on items.
See, it's Dudleyville. It's in the San Pedro Valley. For us, like, our ranch has a year-round flowing river or creek or stream. It's called a river.
It's itty bitty. It's a creek.
But it is water year-round, and it is an area where you can slide down the hill and sit at the bank, and our kids will disappear for hours. That is a unique aspect we have at our ranch, but that whole valley is a beautiful area, and it's an area that doesn't get seen by a lot of people, but some of that I like too.
Mm-hmm.
And we're surrounded by BLM and state trust land. So you got the city on Dudleyville, which I barely call a city, but you got Dudleyville on one side, and the rest of it around us is all state trust land and BLM land. So there's nothing out there to really disturb me. Unless you see stars or lights or anything, it's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned finding employees and the lengthy commutes that they face coming to work and the lack of rural housing. Are there any other challenges to the area where you are located?
Access can be a challenge sometimes. That same river that we love so much also floods generally 2 or 3 times a year. 2 years ago, it stayed flooded for
couple months.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, 2 or 3 months. And so it adds for us, it adds about another hour's worth of drive because it's a 30-mile dirt road in on the dry side. But at the end of the day, that's a challenge, but we've figured out how to work through it. We've moved a lot of storage into the Gilbert area, so we can store a lot of meat here, and then we don't have to make 5 or 6 trips.
Transporting has been a challenge of transporting frozen items in July when it's 115 degrees and how we do that. And we started out very small and loading coolers in the back of the truck, and then we needed more space from the bed of the truck. And so as we've grown, that's always just kind of a speed bump of how are we going to move this frozen meat. And now we also drop off carcasses to local butcher shops that buy from us. And so now we're like, okay, this is even bigger. This doesn't fit in the cooler. What do you do with a whole carcass? And so, that's been a challenge.
Yeah, and so transportation of food. And once again, when we look at the grants aren't really designed for producers. They're designed for researchers. They're designed for marketing professionals, distributors. Pinnacle Prevention is a nonprofit here that manages the SNAP program here. And they also secured a grant a few years ago. And so they've purchased, 9 or 10 refrigerated vans that we can lease for free from them to transport. So it would be nice if we could, that same grant, we don't qualify for it because they don't want the business to own it. I don't understand the whole process, but that kind of thing, like the transportation and movement of food is a huge challenge that all of us are facing. And, when we refer to the Farm Bill, like that's what I'd love to see get into there is, as we push the farms more and more rurally and you push them out from where the general population is, you're now asking them to get everything in. And how do we get that in? And how do we keep it safe? People talk about food safety. If we're doing coolers in the back of a pickup truck in 120 degrees and we don't get back in 2 hours.
If there's a car accident, if there's a fire, then that's product that we could be losing. So
that's one of the challenges. It's like I said, we've done a pretty good job mediating it in our programs. Like I said, there's some nonprofits that are doing really good work and they're helping, but allowing it to come back into more of the rancher's control.
So we see the SNAP program at a couple of our farmers markets. We work 4 farmers markets and 3 out of the 4 accept SNAP in different forms, but they all accept it. And I think, it's a fantastic program to be able to allow all different kinds of people from different socioeconomic standings to be able to shop at the farmers market and not have it be, a classist experience. So I think I hope that continues. It's a fantastic program, and it makes the farmers markets more accessible for people in the urban areas, I think.
And we're fortunate, like I said, I mentioned Pinnacle Prevention. That is a nonprofit that built itself to manage the SNAP program, because I can tell you as a rancher and a business owner, I couldn't do the paperwork and manage that program. Like it would take so much time that eventually we wouldn't do it because we couldn't afford to do it. So the nonprofits that are out there and that are managing the SNAP program, they're simplifying it.
It's as a vendor at the farmers market, I do all of our paperwork for the markets. That's one of my focuses, and they have it really streamlined where you can watch a video and answer questions, fill out the form pertaining to your form of agriculture and what you do, and it's really simple. And so the way they have it set up in Arizona, it's very user friendly.
Yeah, and I attribute that to, like I said, the nonprofits that are doing it. It's Pinnacle Prevention here, but I'm sure other states have.
Sure.
have similar programs, because to do it as an individual business, it would be really challenging to manage. So we do appreciate those, but any help they can do to promote that within, supporting the nonprofits and paying them for access would be amazing for us and for the consumers. But one market that doesn't do it,
They get a lot of social media grief about not participating from the customers.
That's interesting. So it sounds like the SNAP benefits and sustaining good levels of benefits and the accessibility for people is really important to the markets that you're working in. And it would be disruptive to your business if those were to be changed or.
I think it would change what we have. I would be hesitant to say that it would hurt the businesses, but I think it would really reduce the availability to a lot of the clientele. We have one particular client that uses the SNAP program, and he buys a quarter cow every, I don't know, 6 to 9 months. Well, that's $1,100. So he banks his SNAP money and puts in the order with us, and then we are able to deliver that.
And he can buy it through the market, which is pretty exceptional. I don't think that would probably work in all markets that do SNAP, but
yeah, so it works really well. So it would I think it would change it, and it would make the markets a little more of a lead, because things are expensive at the farmers markets. It's expensive for us to get there. It's expensive for people to buy things from us and people that are producing. So yeah, I think it would change the clientele. I appreciate the clientele that come in and, they want to use offal and beef tongues and make very ethnic dishes that I've never heard of. And sometimes they share them. And, so like we've just learned that there are a lot of other ethnicities in our area that do rely on SNAP, and so we're able to provide them with good, healthy meat and stuff they're used to having. Goat was a good example, but yeah, just different offerings.
Yeah, that's great. Thinking about the 2024 Farm Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, do you have any suggestions on how the new Farm Bill could work better for you and other farmers and ranchers? You've already talked about a few things, but I'm wondering if there's anything else.
I would tell you that I've been involved in a few of the USDA panels and the focus, and they're in a tough place because we're small scale, and we talk to other farms like, oh, you're so big. We're not. We're pretty small in comparison to a lot of the other farms out there. Their focus has been shifted back to, in my opinion, back to more efficient production and reduction in people, and will save the environment by using more efficient tractors and having them on GPS and better ways of sowing the soil and all these different pieces and parts. And those are probably the largest challenges for me. And it's a challenge for me because in one particular panel, Secretary Velshak was talking about the 80s and how it's get big or go home. And all these farms have gone out of business because of this, and they've been pushed out. And there seems to have been, in the last Farm Bill, there was a push to start to support more of the small businesses and small farmers. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it brought to light that 85% of the meat produced in the U.S. comes from 4 major companies, maybe 5. I think it's 4. And so in response to that, the Inflation Reduction Act brought out the grants that those companies didn't qualify for, but we did. I think removing those are going to be harmful. I also think when we talk about conservation, we talk about regenerative agriculture. Our biggest challenge is irrigation. We're in Arizona, we're in the desert. And there are very efficient ways that we can irrigate. Those are also very expensive ways to irrigate. We're fortunate that we have water rights. And so our water rights would allow us to flood irrigate 30 acres of land. And so we have enough water to use and utilize all of our land. Flood irrigation is completely ineffective, or not effective, it's wasteful, as opposed to us using more directed or irrigation things. Well, that's a $100,000, $200,000 transition. I'd rather see the money go into helping us go to a more efficient method. And then there's always fights for water rights here in this state in particular. That allows us the ability to say, okay, you can lease our water rights. We can supply water rights to other people because we can reduce our usage. And then we still have those rights, and we can actually allow other farms that don't to lease them and use those water rights to be more productive. So when we're talking about like the conservation programs, what I have a hard time is I don't think automation is the way to go. I think being efficient and having some automation is definitely important. I would love to have radio colors on my animals and all the automation that goes along with that. But if I had to spend $100,000 on that or $100,000 on irrigation, I'd rather spend on irrigation because I can be water. I can be more water. I can conserve more water. I can plant the cover crops to have a higher moisture retention within our soil. So these are things that we deal with, and we're doing it anyways. It's just, we're talking about a 3-acre test plot right now, and we want to run that test plot into 3 acres and make sure we do it right. Because when we do the other acreage, it's a huge investment. So if we can get it right on 3, then we can transition into the other pastures and other fields. And for us, regenerative agriculture means that we would add a crop to our product, or to our ranch. So with our climate, we were looking at figs or pomegranates. And then we can have the sheep and the pigs run under and around, and you still use them in the regenerative format of livestock, but also have a cash crop that's producing and supplying for the community. But that's when you ask the question of like what I'm watching with that bill is let's actually use the money that we have out there and make it, I guess, more easily accessible. Because right now, they say it's out there. I'm pretty good at finding grants. I'm pretty good at researching. I can't find it. And I have a lot of really good friends that are really good at researching, and they can't find it. One of them was like, oh, but you can go build a retention pond. You can have a 1-acre retention pond. It's like, well, that doesn't solve the problem. Now I'm pumping out of the retention pond. How does that solve distribution of the water? So those are kind of making it more accessible or more easily accessible.
It sounds like money that is available for the purpose of distributing water, more efficient irrigation also allows you to help other growers in the area with what they're doing, and you would be ultimately helping the community produce more food.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
more producers.
We're right next to the San Carlo Reservation, and they're always fighting for water rights. And I'd rather look at them and say, okay, here's X amount of water that you guys can lease from us, and you can have it for 5 years, and then then we're not having a legal battle. They're not spending $100,000 a year trying to fight and find more water rights. They're spending $3,000 a year, $4,000 a year to rent water rights that are available and accessible to them. And so improving the communication between the native population here and the rural ranchers is another aspect that comes with it is now we're not fighting each other anymore. We don't have to go, we don't have to hire attorneys to fight over the water rights. We were very fortunate. Like I said, our water rights were established 18 something and then documented in the early 1900s. So we still have to go to court and say this every 20, 30 years. So we know we're not going to lose them, but.
And that year is this year.
Yeah, that year is this year. But there's enough to go around. We just need to figure out how to make it effective.
Some legislators wish to take the 20 billion in conservation agriculture funding in the IRA and use it for other farm bill purposes. Do you have any thoughts about potential impacts from repurposing that funding?
One of the challenges, so our property is all under conservation easement. When we bought it that way, we chose to purchase it that way. It does bring the value of our property down as it relates to nobody's going to come and develop our land because they can't. And so those conservation easements make a big difference. And my family's from agriculture. And they did the same thing in New Hampshire with our old dairy farm there. All that's still under conservation and education easements. So I'm very familiar with those principles. But those programs could be a lot more effective. And instead of being an easement that's a restriction and really hurts our resale value or all those pieces, and it's hard to say because we're not looking at just resell it. It's just a matter of the simple fact of the farm down the road is $1 million and ours is 800,000. That kind of aspect that it just happens because we're in the conservation easements. I think there's ways to take that 20 billion and focus on making the easements more reasonable for people. That what if my kids want to take this property and they're not interested? They want to move on and do something different. Mm-hmm. How do we handle those? And could we not use that money in a way to make it more effective for them to be able to move on? Now they're not selling the land to developers. They're going into they're saying, okay, we have this easement and so we can provide this. And now you build an aspect of where beginning farmers can go and work on these and build the land that's already there, can come and figure out how to work it, because the entry into what we do is really tough. It's a huge number. We were pretty much debt free, minus our home, and then we started a business. We bought the ranch, and
now we're no longer debt free.
So we're in our 40s and our 50s, so we have enough history to be able to do what we did and how we're doing it. There's a 30-year-old that's on our property that she would love to do something like this. I don't know how she would afford it. I don't know how. So I think we can take the money, and even if we're not focused on regenerative and we're not that, these are people that are into conservation and they want to preserve what we do as in the heritage of farming and ranching and those aspects. They just can't afford to anymore. So I think when you ask me about and reallocating it, but in the regenerative agriculture portion, I think that we can do a lot with it. I went through the process of the organic farming, and I remember we were in Washington, and there was a sales manager of organic farm. Every year they would come evaluate our pesticide and insecticide and herbicide usage, but we weren't using any. But our neighbor was, and so our neighbor would get $150,000, $200,000 check because they reduced their usage. We wouldn't get anything because we didn't. Well, how does that work? I believe we need to incentivize people to reduce and become more responsible with how we do it. So I think figuring out a way to work a similar program within regenerative agriculture, but don't punish those of us that are early adopters or those that are already in it. Like, don't punish me because, we're going out and we already planted, native seed. Let's, talk about how we do it. So I guess that's my little soapbox. Sorry. I get frustrated with those aspects where we're choosing to do it and we're going to bite the bullet and we're going to take the additional costs. But if we want it to grow, it's not going to happen if we don't help others.
Mm-hmm.
That's my soapbox. I'm sorry. Get it off on.
Great. So just to restate, you have made the choice to minimize chemical inputs and to make this transition. And so we should be careful not to penalize people who have made these choices and are doing this work by financially subsidizing or incentivizing the use of those chemical inputs.
Yeah, we're going to go and say, oh, well, we're going to reduce the cost for your sprayer so that you can go spray all of this out here. I don't know. Like I said, I can get on a different tangent about all of how that works. It's, I understand the chemical improvement in nitrogens and that, but there's another farmer in West Valley here that we're trying to figure out how to utilize the inedible aspects of our animals and how to convert it into bone meal and to fertilizer. And wow, the cost is so prohibitive, so hard. But once you put that initial investment in, you can now capitalize on an aspect of the animal that we're burying or we're disposing of in a different manner. And now you have a fertilizer that is out and already in production. So I guess that's sort of where I'd like to see more of it go is why am I required and have to bury my inedible material from livestock that we're processing when it would be the amount of calcium, and I say calcium because that's one of the big deficiencies we have in our soil here. The amount of calcium we can put back into the soil, the nutrients and everything that comes out of the inedible aspects of those animals can go right back into the fields and really help the development of it. The best soil that we've run into in our farm is we dug up a plot to expand the plant and realized that was the disposal area from the 80s, and it was the darkest soil I've ever seen in Arizona. It was amazing. And that's kind of where the brain goes, well, if this is what happens when they just buried it 20 years ago, what could we do now? Like, how could we do it? So those are the programs that I'd like to see that money go to. And I don't know anywhere that's looking at it, to be honest. The crazy farmer, right?
The inventor.
It's out there. I just can't afford it.
Thank you so much for the important work that you do and for taking the time to share with us today. We really appreciate your time and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Links to the interviewed guests, farms, and topics discussed can be found in the episode notes. The Farm Voices podcast is produced by the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition, a working group of climate reality project leaders and chapter members. Please subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share the episode with others. It helps us raise the visibility of this important information, and we greatly appreciate your support. Join us in the next episode for more on the 2024 Farm Bill and farms and ranches practicing regenerative and conservation agriculture methods.